In the name of God, the Holy and Undivided Trinity. Amen. In the rule of Saint Benedict, Saint Benedict reminds all the monastics following his rule that visitors to the monastery will be welcomed as Christ. Not will be welcomed in the name of Christ, not will be welcomed because Jesus said, oh yeah, by the way, you might want to be kind to people. But visitors to the monastery will be welcomed as Christ. That is challenging in the extreme. People just show up. We fall into the habit, if we are Benedictines, and we're not in religious orders, but Saint Benedict has much to tell us. If strangers show up, we expect to have an encounter with the holy, to have an encounter with the divine. We are welcoming strangers not as if they are Christ, but because they are in fact an embodiment of the holy, of the divine, which seems to be exactly what Jesus was saying to the 12. We've gotten to the end of Matthew chapter 10, and the whole chapter has been Jesus sending the 12 out to go to all the towns in Israel to proclaim the good news that the kingdom of heaven has come near. And this is the last thing he says to his disciples before they go out. He says, anyone who welcomes you welcomes me. Now I begin to wonder where St. Benedict got that bit of the rule from. Right from Jesus. Whoever welcomes you welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes the one who sent me. It's a challenging gospel. It's this idea that we connect with God in very human encounters and in very human ways that I think is troubling for us. I mean, that we acknowledge that it's hard, but Jesus is working within the context of a culture that had built-in rules for hospitality. And I have talked about this before, that it was difficult to make it safely from point A to point B in the ancient world unless the culture itself embraced the idea that if a stranger shows up, at the very least, you're going to give them a cup of cold water. Maybe give them a meal to send them along their way. It was a difference in the culture that I think we've lost, but that's the cultural assumption that Jesus is making. When you go out amongst strangers, you will find welcome, and if you don't, shake the dust off your sandals. That's a little bit earlier in chapter 10, and move on to the next town. But the idea being, they can expect hospitality from strangers. And I think Jesus is reminding the 12 that. He's reminding the community that would have been reading Matthew's gospel for the first time and reminding us that our encounters with the divine are not necessarily of the letters of fire 50 miles high in the sky kind. They're not necessarily you go up to the mountaintop kind of encounters with the divine. That when we encounter the divine, it is when we're interacting with each other. It is when we look out into the world and see in the faces of the people we meet the face of Jesus. When we realize that when we embrace this idea of hospitality, when we embrace this idea of welcome, that we're embracing and inviting an encounter with the holy. We're inviting an encounter with the sacred. And to jump over just for a minute to Paul's letter to the Romans, I'm not going to tease out Paul's whole theory of sinfulness and law and grace and all that in this sermon, but one word strikes me in this passage today: sanctification. It shows up in Paul's letters, and it points to the idea that as followers of Jesus, we are being sanctified. We are being made holy. We are being transformed. So I'm going to put that word sanctification in dialogue with another word from later in Paul's letter to the Romans, transformation. That the idea of being a follower of Christ, the idea of coming to know the divine in community, is changing us little by little. When we embrace the idea of hospitality and when we embrace the idea of welcome, when we open our doors to whoever may show up, it changes us. We begin to learn that when we look out into the face of anyone else, human, walking the planet, we are looking into the face of Christ. We're diving deep into what I would call Pauline spirituality. We're diving deep into what Jesus would call the way of the cross. We're diving deep into the way of discipleship. That what we learn when we become followers of Jesus is exactly that, is transformation, is the repetitive practice of recognizing that there is no human being, indeed, there is no molecule of any sort, no atom of any sort that has not been touched by the divine. So I want to give a very maximal reading of what it means, of what the incarnation implies, is that the presence of the divine is wherever we look. In the faces of others, in the creation itself, and in us. That may be the hard part, right? The hard part of loving our neighbor as ourselves is we got to love ourselves first. Man, wait, really? No, really. We look within and we see the divine. And if we can catch even the faintest glimpse of that, it changes the way we look at others. We begin to hear the wisdom that Jesus is teaching. We begin to hear the truth of St. Benedict's rule, that we're never outside the presence of the divine. We are never outside the presence of the one who loves us the most. We will never look into a face or look at any part of the creation and not see God looking back at us. Sometimes God waving dramatically to try to catch our attention. Sometimes God shouting from the rooftops, "You need to pay attention to this next bit. It's important." I'm like, oh, we get it. Transformation, sanctification, holiness. The way of the cross and the way of the disciple is the way of recognizing that God has never created anything that is disposable. God has never created anyone who is not beloved. God has never created us to hate ourselves. And that's the reminder we get, that it doesn't take a whole lot. Jesus is sending the 12 out and says, If you receive so much as a cup of cold water, they will not lose their reward. If people are willing to give as much as just a sip of water, they will not lose the reward. And the reward, I think, is community. The reward is the recognition that we are all in this together, no matter who we are and no matter how difficult it can be. The reward is we're always in the presence of the divine, and that we recognize that presence in very human ways. That's the best miracle of all, is that it's all touched by God. It has all been made holy. It's like you don't have to do anything except open your eyes, open your hearts, open your spirits. This is what I hear Jesus saying to the 12. It doesn't take an extraordinary effort to embrace the way of love and the way of kindness and the way of grace. So I began by quoting the Rule of Benedict. I think I will end this version of today's homily by quoting Doctor Who. And I may be speaking an alien language, but the premise of that show is that every so often the Doctor regenerates and becomes physically a different person. So when the 12th Doctor is dying and getting ready to become someone else, he is making a list of things to remind his future self. It turns out to be a woman in this case. So the 12th Doctor says, always try to be nice, but never fail to be kind. And that sounds a lot like what St. Benedict is saying in the Rule, and it sounds a lot like what Jesus is saying to the 12. Always try to be nice, but never fail to be kind. Never fail to recognize that the divine is all around us and all within us and everywhere that we look. Amen.